first session, really, we're going to look at the work that we did late part of last year. We actually published it, which was a learning priorities survey that we were conduct with 150 people across the globe, all working in senior positions in L&D. And we were able to do a little snapshot of a survey, which we did through LinkedIn, which we asked those L&D people what was on their mind, what were they looking at, what did they see happening in 24, and what were their primary objectives for the year. And I thought it would be quite good just to revisit that and maybe set the scene, Andy, for your presentation on 25 and some of the trends that you're seeing, Lars, that I think will build on what was in this survey. And hopefully, Michael, again, from a North American perspective especially, but from a global perspective, obviously, as well, that we can give insight there. So the survey itself is available on our website. It's available through the LinkedIn page, and we'll put a link to it at the end of this presentation as well. It's actually contained about 29 different areas. We're going to pick 4 to go through. So the first question that we posed to the teams were, what were their main focus areas for 24? And the 5 leading areas, and they'll come across the screen now, the statistics as the slides move on, were around upskilling, around the implementation of artificial intelligence, concerns around diversity, which is a huge issue, certainly over here in Europe, technical skills and the provision of technical skills at different levels. And a lot of people were intrigued by the area of integrating virtual worlds. If I look at the slides, the figures come up, I think it was a fairly even spread. Probably about a third of people were saying that as their main priority, they had areas here that were really important to them. And as a panel, I was just going to ask you, in your work in 24, whether these actually resonated as priorities for organizations. Maybe I turn to you first of all, Andy, and maybe we pick something that's pertinent for work we're doing at the moment, the area of diversity.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I mean, obviously, I don't think it's a surprise to any of us that AI is well up there, and I know during the 2 days we'll unpack that in more detail. But I think when we look at diversity and also skills as well, those jumped out to me as really interesting ones, and not ones maybe that would, certainly 5 years ago, would have been focused on the skills or diversity agenda. So I think it's interesting around diversity. Obviously, there's some political issues around this, there's some challenges around this. But I think organisations are recognising now that if you want to be innovative, if you want to move your services forward, if you want to be customer focused, then diversity is such a crucial part of what we do. And I think for me, it often used to be just the remit of human resources teams, whereas this is fair and square now responsibility of learning and development teams to work with the organisation to really promote and enhance the concepts of diversity and the application of that in the business.
If I may turn to yourself, Lars, if we looked at the key focus areas that people talked about here, I'm going to ask you, what challenges, what areas did you see, maybe in the area of upskilling or reskilling in the world of the provision of great systems to do that?
Yes, indeed. I mean, we live in times which are, accelerating and only getting more exponential.
Yeah.
This, in this session. But essentially, upskilling and reskilling has only become much more important, and we're seeing that across our global sort of customer organisational base. Is that, to keep up, not just keep up, to stay competitive.
Yeah.
You do need to, be actively redesigning, I think, your approach to upskilling and reskilling so that it's genuinely aligned around becoming more of a competitive advantage as opposed to, some of the bare minimum things that some organisations, unfortunately, sort of relax back into.
And I'm hopeful that when you go through your piece, well, I know that because I've actually seen the slides, so forgive me, that we'll talk about some of the practical ways in which we can focus on upskilling within our agenda. So I'm going to reach across to you, Michael. I know you have a unique position in that you work with thousands of individuals and hundreds of different companies at any one time. Would these focus areas that were identified in this survey, would they resonate with what you saw in 2024?
They do. They're very similar to what we see as well. I think what we see as an overall theme is at each one of these points that you're mentioning is, I would add the words at scale, because that's really the big challenge, is scalability of all of these. When you have 5 people in your company and you can pull them all into the conference room and make them feel good about what's going on and feel a sense of belonging, AI is very easily governed with 3 people. Upskilling and reskilling 4 people is very simple to do, technical skills and so on. So the only thing I would add is at scale, because that's where we see the complexity and difficulty. So when you're trying to do this as a global organization, covering 4 continents, 20,000 employees, 12 languages, several different dialects, where your manager may not even live on the same continent. So that's the only thing that jumps out at me with these stats. And at scale isn't held out to be something only for like what we consider really big companies. Anytime you're trying to do something more than several hundred employees and they're dispersed across a particular region, the complexity kicks in immediately. So I think going forward, what organizations are looking for is, how do I address that scale, flexibility, agility, adaptivity to these major areas? And quite frankly, where they're looking to get that done the quickest is through technological innovation.
Very good. Now, valid point. I mean, the guys in the panel and yourself, you may not have seen the range of people who've dialed in the call, but I think what you all said resonates very much across what I know from the profile of our guests. We've got representatives of quite small niche organizations. We've got representatives of companies who are working across government, across country. So the issue of scalability, I think, will be one that will resonate with the group. So thanks for that. I'm going to move to the next question that came out of the survey, and let's hold the previous thought. We were curious at the time, and we're still curious as a provider of learning services that I said, how do people see their priorities? We saw a tremendous, like any learning company, a tremendous variation in media delivery pre, post, and during COVID. And in 24, we asked the question, what do people see as their learning delivery methods that they're currently focusing on? And we gave them a choice: coaching, hybrid learning, virtual training, just using online content libraries, or actually, good old-fashioned person-to-person training. What were the responses that we got? And I think they'll come up on the screen now. And a great move to coaching, which personally surprised me. I don't know if any of you guys would like to jump in and pass a comment on why coaching is seen as being still relatively important.
Yes, Steve, I'll come in on this. I think, for me, it isn't surprising, because we know that learning often is a human-to-human process. And that's a really important part. And that's not in any way decrying digital and AI and those kind of things, but we know that this socialized learning is quite important. And we see in other reports that social collaborative learning is now on the increase as well. We can see that in-person training might be dropping, the concept of working an old classroom format or a venue-based thing. But this concept of actually being alongside people who can sharpen our practice, I think, is really important. And I think most of us probably, the guests would probably recognise someone in their own career path who had an important part to play in that. If we're looking at skilling and reskilling people, that's not going to be course-based. That's often going to be in the workplace, in the flow of work. So in some ways, Steve, I'm hugely heartened that coaching is in there, because I think it's a really powerful tool for us to leverage.
Could I add, essentially, I feel that it sort of resonates that there's a democratization of access to coaching now happening because of the improvement in technology to support that, not least in terms of reaching people at scale, but being able to personalize that and adapt that and be able to essentially deliver what is really a personalized support, which has always been a mainstay of effective learning practice. I think it's not been able to be effectively or efficiently delivered at scale. So being able to embed that as part of the core of any learning design is really critical. And just another broad comment about hybrid being up there as well. Another aspect of this is thinking about blended learning. So when we talk about blended learning, I know that's an oldish term maybe, but it's one where we need to think about those 3 elements of an effective learning outcome. So learning that you do, which might be in person, online, whatever, but then also collaborating with others, which could be one person or many, and then also getting that evidence and feedback is really critical. So I think all of those elements are I think, shown in this survey.
Coaching, we used to have this concept that you went to be coached.
Yes.
You know, that was often my experience of the early days of coaching. You've made a really important point there, that this is peer-to-peer coaching now as well. So I think the model of coaching, so for those listening in, we maybe need to rethink our models. I think you've made a really important point there, that this is not going and being an executive coach or something. This is about everybody having access to being coached, which is important.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So Michael, just looking back at that, I mean, coaching, the guys are quite animated by it here. Have you seen technology advances facilitate better coaching, better access to coaching, or is it still early days in how we could impact there?
Well, I'm going to broaden the conversation to adding mentoring to that as well, because mentoring and coaching, which we talk about together, but have very different approaches in how that's helpful. People are looking to get back to relationship-oriented learning. When I entered the workforce 40 years ago, apprenticeship was a big deal. Spent a lot of time being assigned to someone, shoulder to shoulder with someone. And the part that we haven't touched on yet about why it's growing so quickly in mentoring as well is you get what I call cognitive transfer. And what I mean by that is giving someone something to learn without having an opportunity for feedback and interaction. So coaching and mentoring, collaborative-based learning, as Andy and Lars brought up, it allows for something very powerful but very subtle, which is at the moment I'm learning, I'm also receiving feedback at the same time. I'm not waiting for a performance review, someone to walk down the hallway, ask me how I'm doing, see you on the next virtual meeting a month from now in the staff meeting. So I think it's very important from a cognitive standpoint is people need to know whether they're moving in the right direction or not instantaneously as they learn. And I think that's why coaching and mentoring is coming back, roaring back. To answer your question more specifically about technology, the short answer is yes. We see a lot of AI influence in offering coaching and mentoring, but there is even studies and research that have shown that coaching and mentoring delivered through an AI platform is actually more effective and more efficient because people still oftentimes have a real challenge in admitting where they are in the process to another human being. Yeah. And particularly in organizations, there's still a bias that most coaching and mentoring, is done by someone that is in a position of authority to that individual, which makes it even more difficult for someone to be revealing about how they're really doing or how they really feel, or it's just a mini performance review. I think the jury's out as to where it'll go from an AI standpoint. I think it's very promising, but it's still going to come down to whether or not you feel like you're connecting with another human being and getting that closeness, that intimacy that we like. As far as the other areas that are brought up there, again, I'm going to ask people to consider this from a scale standpoint. These numbers can move dramatically when you ask about methodology as it relates to scale. So for example, you say to a company from a scaling standpoint, how do you deliver most learning? They're going to tell you through an LMS. So these numbers could skew dramatically. I think the point that we have to look at is what are we trying to accomplish from a learning perspective? And personalization is understanding what someone already knows and what the journey they need to go on. But as we talk about oftentimes in our research and advisory work that we do, is that environment, that surrounding, that journey that you put someone on is going to contain all of this. But in a certain percentage and blended approach, that really makes it all happen properly.
Okay. Now, thanks for that, Michael. Let's move on to the next question, if we may. Please rate the impact that AI can have in various areas of L&D. Now, bear in mind, this is 2024. So back then, I think we knew a lot less than we know now, and certainly a lot less than we're going to know in the coming months. And the group that responded, not surprisingly, aired very much to seeing AI as potentially being either moderately or extremely impactful. Say not a surprise, and that's probably one of the key themes of present today. How are organizations that you're seeing today, maybe in 2025, using AI differently to what they were using it 6 months ago?
I think for me, when you get a new technology or a new toy, it's really interesting to try and work out what you're going to do with it. And I think that the organisations that are doing powerful things with this have not got a technology looking for a solution, have got a solution looking for technology, and that they're actually focused in on what you're going to be doing with this. So saw some interesting stuff recently about the use of AI in a care setting, but they had a very specific business operational case for why they were going to use that. So I think for me, that's where I'm getting most excited. We know we can generate content, and probably most of us are doing that. But I think if we come at the AI conundrum, I think it is a conundrum, but we think about, just as any other kind of learning or performance development thing, what are we trying to achieve? Then we've got a chance to use AI to actually drive this faster impact.
So putting learning back into context, almost the good old-fashioned value of actually understanding really what the job entails, how work should be designed perhaps to be most effective, and therefore the learning.
And that, for me, and I'm sure all of us are passionate about this, performance in the moment of need is so crucial, and AI gives us the opportunity to do that. So I think, again, for guests listening in, for us here, we start with the problem. We then see how AI can then potentially solve that for us.
Indeed. I see AI as being a fully transformational piece of technology that you shouldn't see in isolation around a specific area within a business. It's fundamentally going to reshape all aspects of it. And we need to be able to, I think, from a technology perspective, be able to tap into what will be sort of core AI support mechanisms that will be performance support. It will be able to then reshape how any sort of preparatory training and abstract learning to make better use of these tools in an operational sense. So it's an interesting, I think, reshaping of where this might be heading. So from an L&D context, I think it's been quite easy to get excited about producing more content for more people at a fraction of the time and cost that it would normally take. But you've got to ask yourself the question, is that the right answer?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you were to, I went to the Learning Technologies exhibition in London last year, and you couldn't move for people making the greatest promises about AI and it was going to change their lives. I think, to your point, Lars, AI-driven design tools maybe help those of us in learning development be more effective at some of the background work, but not necessarily take away the creativity that we need to bring, the understanding of roles that we have in shaping great learning. I'm going to throw that back across to you, Michael. Any further thoughts?
I think it's interesting. I think you can't answer this question without asking another question, which is, how prepared are you to bring it into the building? And that's where we see a stark difference between the two, where people will say, yes, I see it being very impactful. I see it having a lot of force to drive forward what I want to do. But you'll see a much higher percentage of people are saying, I'm still on the fence about using it, strictly from a governance standpoint. So I think no one would dispute the fact that it's going to be impactful. What they want to be able to do is control the impact. And by doing that, it's good governance. So we see from our research that there's more than half of organizations are still kind of in that I'm figuring it out stage. I think this is where we have to be able to help organizations understand, what is that governance model? How do I bring AI in properly? How do I make sure that its intended uses are purposeful and positive? What impact that it has on staff and how it's used? And there's still a lot to be done. I'm hoping that this year, with the advent of the LMs being out there yet another year, and more providers are becoming what I consider transparent, equitable, and explanatory about their AI models, I think this is going to raise the level of comfort for organizations to bring it into their everyday work schedules and having people work with it, and depending on its output and depending on the insights that it provides.
I think that's really insightful. The idea of governance, I think, is really one to fully understand, and I'm sure resonates with our audience today. People are working in organizations, as we said earlier, varying different sizes, but their governance of understanding, am I involved in the right project at the right time? Am I communicating to stakeholders, to peers, to learners where we are? Are we taking the fear away? and
That's a
working
good point.
through that.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay. I mean, we have
just to jump in on
really
that for a
important
second,
role
like
in
I get a
including
question
providers.
asked all the time of us about, will AI replace my job? You know, and the answer really is AI will not replace your job, but someone who learns how to use AI could. And so just a simple paradigm around that. These are the things that people are still concerned about as you bring AI, particularly into the learning environment.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move to our next question, guys, if we may. And it brings us back to the theme of partnership, which is today's theme for the forum as well. But so we asked the team how they saw collaboration with other organisations being a key part of how they develop their own learning strategies within AI. And the selection of answers on the screen there were to, do we see it working with other organisations being important in providing case studies? Do we see it as being most important in terms of giving us roadmaps of a way forward, maybe to support the governance argument? Do we see, the opportunity to look continually where we are against such a roadmap? And, do we see other organisations we're working with, maybe colleagues on the call today, as giving us the opportunity for consultation? It'd be interesting to see what the 150 people saw in the answers. Again, a pretty unified split, and I think that opens up a question for the group as we go forward. I think just looking at the slides, I'm sure people can see that, each of those areas probably has their own relevance and own importance. Anything to add on an insight here about consultation and partnership?
I think I'd look at AI in terms of a customer experience. I rely as a customer on partnering with vendors to provide great services for me, be that Amazon, whatever. So I'm reliant on people who are specialists to do that. And I think for learning and development professionals, it is moving very fast. So I think we absolutely should rely on collaboration. And I think for some of those who are joining us today, I'm sure you're either a singleton in your learning team or a small team, therefore collaboration is vital. So again, I would be looking to guys like you to give that kind of support and advice, and together we can diagnose what we need to do and what might be the right tool for doing that.
If you would like the copy of last year's survey, it's available on our website. What we would really hope is that you feel inclined to actually join us in the survey for 2025. And again, in the chat notes and also following the presentation today, we're going to provide a link for you to be able to do that. And then we'll be conducting the survey in a couple of months' time in the middle of the year. Alignment with governments, I picked up on the point that Michael made there. Development efficiency, keeping up with regulations. Regulations actually, Lars, I mean, do you see issues with regulations being a challenge in an adoption of AI? Do you think it's a wild west out there? Or?
Well, more generally about regulation, when it comes to learning and development, I think that occupies a huge percentage of our time, doesn't it, in terms of mandatory regulation that we have to deal with, the policies that we apply within our organisations, and that should be representing good, better practice that you want to exhibit across at scale, particularly if you're a larger organisation. So handling regulation and compliance, but putting a positive spin on behavioural compliance as being something that's about performing consistently and well within your role is really critical. So that's not going away. I think tools like AI will help that, particularly move the pendulum from being a reactive, just in case, sheep dip sort of response to compliance. I have to do it. Let's get everybody through it, tick the box, to one where it's about, yes, people are behaviourally compliant and that they are able to perform consistently and well in their role and therefore become more collectively competitive in their role. And one final point about that is that regulation is not static. It has, in some sectors, it's been static for quite a long time. But just look at what's going on politically around the world. There's huge change coming, and businesses need to be able to respond to that quickly.
Absolutely. I'm just going to introduce you to another colleague, joining Michael on my left and your right. I think there we are. Is our colleague Louise Brogan. Louise, you've been monitoring the comments and any questions that have been coming up. Has anybody raised anything specific that you'd like to add to the discussion at this stage? And then we perhaps can put the question to one of the panel.
Yes, absolutely. So there was a comment about, so Amy Burton says, some great points, really enjoying this discussion. It's AI is such a prominent buzzword in L&D space, which should be used cautiously and meaningfully, a tool that should be leveraged and not leaned on. And then we have a question from somebody, Steve, but do you want to respond to Amy
Well,
first?
I like that phrase that Amy's used, leveraged but not leaned on.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask one of the guys to jump in and maybe comment on that. What do you think? Leveraged but not leaned on, Andy?
Yeah, well, let me reflect on my own practice. Let's make this personal. I have leaned on ChatGTP in the early days and perhaps became dependent on some of that stuff, which is very different from leveraging it for the right purposes. So I think I had a really interesting case study the other day. I need to find this and I can post this to the folks, of someone who went for a university interview. When they were interviewed, they just fell to pieces because they'd spent their whole time just, leaning on ChatGTP without coming up with their own thinking. So I think that's a really interesting point. It is about leveraging it properly and not this becoming a prop for us just to not do some of the heavy lifting ourselves.
So you're treating the new technology with respect.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it comes down to your definition of AI as well. When it's generative AI and tools, general tools like that, you can be in danger of leaning on it in ways that may not be accurately or actually sustainable. But if you're thinking about AI and agency, so being able to do things with AI and AI being able to facilitate and complete tasks on your behalf, then, and if you're tying that into workflow design and job design fundamentally, then frankly you are leaning on it. You're redesigning the way your work operates, and so it's leveraging that technology in a deeper sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I would
Yes,
add
please,
one
Michael.
point to that, if I could.
Yeah.
I never believed that AI was a standalone process. And I think we always have to make sure that AI is mixed in with HI, human intelligence. It's a mix, and it's a balance of collaboration. I think where we get in trouble is when we say AI is going to be a substitution methodology, a complete replacement strategy. I think these are some of the claims that providers make. I personally think that AI stands now for all in rather than artificial intelligence. If you walk down the corridors of many of the great conferences, everybody's flying their banner with AI. But you see very seldom people bringing up HI. And I think what's going to bring comfort to learning organizations is knowing that the human aspects of this, AI can't interpret and perceive yet. So we've got to be able to inflect. We've got to be able to judge, we've got to be able to influence, shape how this tool is used, and where do we feel comfortable in that process. AI has its own bias. We're not getting rid of bias by 100% using AI. For example, a lot of people think, get the humans out of it and we'll get rid of all the bias. Well, remember, the neural networking that's built for AI is built by people in the first place with their own bias. So we just got to make sure that human intelligence is mixed in with artificial intelligence in order to get the right blend of what we need it to do. Kind of think about it when I talk to organizations, I kind of say it's like fire. It's a wonderful thing, but if it's not controlled properly and governed properly by humans, it can burn your house down or do other really dreadful things, but it can also be used to cook your dinner and heat your house. So I think we have another version of fire involved, and we just have to make sure that we use good human intelligence to govern it.
Yeah, I like the mix. Exactly,
next.
maybe a new blended learning to pick up on your.
Exactly. Couldn't agree more.
So over on YouTube, Claire Harrison Bradley says, coaching is a perfect approach to weave across the entire change journey over and above knowledge transfer. It encourages the application of the knowledge and reinforces the behavioral change. So what do you say to that, guys?
Well, I'd make
You
a
go
comment.
first. Look.
One comment is about change management, and I'm seeing and a lot of the conversations I have with customers and the usage of their view of learning and development is that increasingly it needs to be reframed as not just about solving a learning problem. It's about a change that needs to happen in the organisation, and that there's a broader set of activities, levers, engagement, stakeholders involved that the L&D team needs to be a core component of, and needs to be able to, I think, speak the language effectively to perform at that level. So it's a reframing of what we do to being about change management and improving performance, in which we have learning and development activities.
Yeah, I think that's a really insightful comment about the whole process, because often many of us have wrestled around learning impact and all the challenges around that. But again, to see coaching as an integral way of us not only supporting performance, imparting knowledge, but actually being there to ensure transfer and impact in the role is really crucial. So thank you, whoever posted that. That was a very insightful. That's excellent.
Yeah. And I think
I'll add one additional point. Different approach. Depends on who's doing the coaching. When we work with organizations, having a good coaching program, foundational and tantamount to that is, who are the coaches, and are they qualified and trained to be good coaches? So we got to make sure that we always get back to the fundamentals of, are we putting people in a position to help others and that they can succeed in that process? I've seen coaching programs go horribly wrong when it has nothing to do with the program. It has everything to do with who's doing the coaching. So particularly when it comes to change management, you're talking about the human condition, and ask someone most likely to change a basic behavior, maybe personally as well as professionally, and adopt a new way of thinking and acting, and potentially overcoming fears in that process. And everyone's on their own change curve. So the quality of the coaching and who's providing it, particularly in the world of DEI, where we want to be coached and mentored by people like us, these are all extremely important considerations before you even embark on the coaching program itself. And those coaches are going to be the ambassador of your change. They are going to be the branding of the change. So I would put a lot of time and effort into what type of coaching and training program you have in place.
Yeah, I
I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear Claire's response as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, Steve.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we've seen it as well. Coaching, working with groups, disparate groups, different markets. You've got to have a person there who can be identified with by the learner, by the organisation, be the same, apply the same energy, reflect what is going on in it. And it, the phrase different horses for courses. Certain countries, certain products, and I think it's exactly the same here. Picking people that you can resonate with, you can identify with it. Otherwise, you won't get the change. And I think, as it was alluded to, you can sometimes do more damage than good.
I think to Michael's point, the quality thing is really important around this, but I still maintain if managers took a coaching approach as their default way of working staff, you're absolutely right. We've got to think through about them having the tools and the training to do that. But where I've been managed by someone who took a coaching approach, it made such a difference to my own performance and my own self-esteem. So this is about embedding coaching across the organisation.
I think that's something we'll come back to over the next couple of days. Technology is great, but what are we doing with it? So Louise, going to pick on you again. What else is on the floor?
Okay. Adrian Snook has asked a question, and he says, so Adrian Snook, helping shape your workforce of tomorrow today, said, could you share a little bit more about the methodology behind the survey? Where the participants given a pick list and could tick multiple options from list? Just wants to know kind of a bit more about how the survey was run, Steve.
Yeah. We, as a methodology, we worked to find 150 people we knew who we could talk to, who didn't strike us off the GDPR list. So that was the first prerequisite. And we went out and we put a survey out which had a mix, to be fair, Adrian, mix of multiple choice questions, mixed of free-flow text questions. I think I said there are about 29 questions in the survey. I'd urge you, without sounding too cheesy and too marketing-based, download a copy for yourself today. Send you the web details of how to do that, and you get the full insight. And we picked 4 for the theme of today's presentation, but we did try and encourage a mix of opportunity. I think looking forward for the 2025 survey, and again, I'll make a plug for that. I know we've got a slide with how to do that coming up, but we want to encourage more and we want to use the technology better to get your input and feedback. So the methodology was a free to join. It was we emailed those who we knew, and we provided a framework of questions to come back to, and it enabled us to publish the survey last year. And I think that was the second one we've done, and for the third one we're looking to refine that still. So, but thanks for your interest.
Okay, Claire has responded to me over on YouTube. Excellent, Claire. Keep the questions and comments coming, folks. She says, agree with all the comments, and more increasingly, I'm involved within change teams as a learning consultant, to the point at which quality is valid, but an opportunity to help companies to grow their own. And there's a question around metrics. What metrics are most effective in evaluating the success of L&D programs last year? How do you know if it was any good?
Wow. What are you seeing? Let's assume that there's the classics, how many people have attended the course, how many classes they've done, what real metrics have you seen that made a difference to companies? Maybe going back to the governance of programs.
Yeah. Next session, I'm going to talk a little bit about value versus volume. And I think it comes back, for me, you'll be familiar with this, but it really comes back to what are we trying to fix and what are we trying to promote, and the metric is embedded within that. So that's what we should be measuring. So it's great to measure some of how many people are engaged, but has it made a difference is a different issue. So I'll go back to the metric which we're actually trying to shift in the organisation.
Yeah, and I'd echo that. I think there's a context that needs to be captured, and that context is going to be based around the company / team, and then breaking that down to an individual set of objectives of what they need to be measured against. And then if their learning is more personalised and more adapted to their needs, then you're going to be wanting to observe how they're putting that into actual practice. Yes, there's completion, there's practice, and then evidencing that capability being activated. So any technology platform needs to be able to enable the capture of all of those elements, also to ensure that you are aligning around business objectives and then translating them right down to the individual's requirements and needs.
So personalisation to the role, the company, the piece of work that needs to be done, and the individual. Michael, would you have anything to add there?
I'm going to appeal to all of the parents in the audience when it comes to proper learning measurement. Could you imagine taking your 5-year-old, handing them a manual, and saying, this is how you need to turn out by the time you're 18, and we'll check in with you when you're 18. So I don't necessarily believe that 100% selling out to business metrics is really the proper approach. I think when we look at and evaluate measurement programs, it's, are you using your measurement program to understand the micro changes that are taking place with the learner and providing instantaneous feedback and giving them learning remediation, just like when we're parenting. We always say it's a hands-on process to shape someone. Yet when we get into learning, we either go to extremes. We either tell people how many completion rates, how many people are in progress, how many people love the course, all of these things, which really are just busy metrics. Or we go to the other extreme of trying to prove that if it wasn't for learning and development, you would have never launched that product on time. I think what we have to do is get back to using learning measurement as a form of making sure that what we're communicating to individuals and what they need to know is sticking, and give them the opportunity to provide feedback on a frequent basis, and then provide additional learning or changes in the learning instantaneously. Just like if we were parenting, we're molding the thoughts and minds of people every day within our organization. And so I'll give you an example. We run an analytics workshop at our annual conference every year. And we'll bring up the people and say, how often do you put out learning metrics? And they'll come up with the whole portfolio of everything to do every day, every week. And then we'll ask them, when is the majority of the feedback given back to the learners? And 9 organizations out of 10 will say the most formal approach to that is the performance review, still, 12 months later. The most powerful approach to coaching is to provide feedback and help people get over the hump. So when you're building a learning measurement program, think about building it in terms of what's the little increments that are on a ruler. It's not that the ruler is 12 inches long. But where are you putting your measurements at the eighth of an inch line, quarter of an inch line, half inch line, 3/4 of an inch line? Those tiny lines are the more important measurement than the entire ruler itself.
I think it draws us nicely though, because I know, Lars, you're going to talk about learning maturity. You're going to talk about going from transactional to actual value-add solutions. Andy, you're going to talk about some of the trends that you're seeing with industries across the board as they move and look forward to 25. And Michael, I know you're going to talk about the practical application. And I think some of the examples you've already given us have given us a great insight as to what we may expect. And we've looked at 25 as being a period of opportunity. I think it's fair to say we're looking at 25 as seeing how we can utilise technology to make it work for us within an L&D perspective. It's not a passive role in learning and development. It's not a passive role to just let learning wash over you or take training courses. It's actually a fundamental role within the business that we're all facing. And I'm hoping now that the scene that we've set, the opportunities around technology, the opportunities around measurement, the opportunities around performance will give us all a platform now to